The use of nuclear weapons is a real possibility and becoming even more real as tensions in the world increase. Today we're talking with Jay Whimpey, the president of the American Civil Defense Association, about practical steps we can take to protect ourselves if this happens.
Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Kylene.
And I'm Jonathan, and we are excited today to have Jay Whimpey with us. Jay's been with us before. He is the president of the American Civil Defense Association, and he is an expert on all things preparedness. And in this case, what we're talking about today is nuclear and some of the threats that face us and how we deal with those threats. I think so often many of our people do not have any idea what they would do or how to even approach this. So our intent today is to provide some good information from Jay on this topic and specifically what you can do to make sure that you're more prepared and having thought through this a little bit. So Jay, give us just a brief introduction of who you are and what you do and why this matters to you.
Well, I've been working with the Civil Defense Organization since the late 80s. We have a mission of trying to help everyone prepare themselves for whatever emergency situation or crisis may arise. Well, for a long time, the organization tried to get the government to actually establish a civil defense program for the general population. However, the U.S. government has largely failed to do so. There is FEMA, and I've read the FEMA manuals and things like that, but they kind of tend to shy away from real good, solid information on nuclear war. It's such an unpleasant topic, and we're so woefully unprepared that I could see why it'd be kind of disturbing. There are other countries that are really quite prepared, and it was really done with not an extravagant amount of money, so it can be done, but we have chosen not to do it. And right now, the government is actually subscribing to the mutual assured destruction doctrine. So, we just make sure that we can go ahead and obliterate anybody that attacks us, but it doesn't really do us much good if they launch first strike and we get obliterated first. And so it's good. Well, it's good for the general population to understand that they're on their own. But there are many very useful, easy things to do to help yourself in the event of a nuclear war. The American Civil Defense Association has a website. It's tacda.org. And on that website, there is a book for sale, Nuclear War Survival Skills. It was written by people who were involved with the nuclear testing in the early 50s and such, and they came at it from a very scientific standpoint, and they have put some really good information in that book. And you just have to understand how you can protect yourself from the nuclear weapons effects, which include blast, heat, and radiation.
This is the book you're talking about. How can people get this book?
They can go to the American Civil Defense website, tacda.org. There's a store on the website, and you can order that book. It is currently out of print. You can actually find the text to Nuclear War Survival Skills on the web, and it is open source, and so you can download and copy and use that information at will. The copyright is expired, and so you can use it however you want.
So today I asked Jay to come on because of my mama heart. I have kids that are far away, and I have college kids, and they don't have many resources. They don't really know what to do if there is some kind of a nuclear event. So I'm hoping that today we can simplify this and that Jay can teach us exactly what you can do if you haven't been able to make advanced preparations.
And maybe the best place to start is how are we going to know if something's going on? I mean, we should probably always stay a little bit aware of what's going on in our country and internationally. But what are the warning signs that we should start perking up our ears and saying, okay, something serious is potentially going to happen? How's the best way to stay in touch with that?
The radio is a really good thing to do. It seems like the information on the television news shows is fairly well doctored, I guess, or I see it being a little bit less useful and less up to date than what's happening on the radio right now. So I would suggest that everyone have a portable radio and maybe listen to some of the news programs. If your radio stops working, like if there's an EMP and your radio doesn't seem to work and all the radio stations are gone, then you might, and especially if the power goes out, you should be very wary and think that, there could be something happening that would be of concern. So I'd say monitor the radio and monitor, well, the power grid and just try to stay informed that way.
And I am pretty certain that there would be something through like the cell phones, like you see the Amber Alerts and things. I would imagine as quickly as possible they would get those alerts out to everyone's cell phone, since almost everyone has a cell phone. And so that's probably another good way to get that information. Now, whether they'll give you good, credible information about what to do, I guess remains to be seen.
If there's an EMP, though, your cell phone's not going to be working, correct?
And that's probably
So you
true.
couldn't depend on
Yeah,
that.
you're probably going to lose towers and everything else.
So yeah, we'll lose power and we'll lose cell phone and perhaps radios. And if you had a radio that was protected from EMP and you pull it out and most of the radio stations are just gone off the air, then that would be a very good indication that there has been an EMP, and you should perhaps start seeking shelter at that time, just because you don't know.
What would a person do? Where do they need to be? Where do they want to be?
There are all sorts of expedient shelters around. You just have to understand the principles. You want to get below ground level and you want to get mass between you and the above ground level area. That's where the dust is deposited. Some people may be familiar with the movie called The Day After. It was made in the 80s and it was about a nuclear war. Well, I thought they did a good job portraying it. There were some people that kind of knew what was going on and immediately sprung into action to do what they were going to do. One farmer actually took his family home and started shoveling dirt into the window wells of his house and got his family in the basement and stayed there. They started putting water together. It would be nice to get a lot of that done in advance if you actually think there's a threat. I would say in current events, there is a threat right now. Long-range missiles are being launched from Ukraine into Russia. Russia has said that they may go nuclear, and so that's a really pretty good indication that we should be, very wary at this time. In that movie, though, there was a few things that were not realistic, I guess. One thing is that they showed the fallout coming down like fine ash. Odds are it would be more like little tiny granules of glass, little round granules, because the material that gets sucked up into a nuclear fireball gets melted together, and so you would see little round particles that are relatively heavy and not really fine like you would think of as ash, perhaps from a volcano and such. But anyway, if the radio's out and perhaps the cell phones aren't working, you should start seeking shelter. And the best shelters around would probably be associated with government or large educational institution buildings, large office buildings or hotels or things like that. They usually have basements that go several stories underground, and they have a fair amount of mass. They're made out of steel and concrete, and so they provide a fair amount of shielding. So if you could get to the lowest floor of an office building or a large government building, perhaps like on a university campus, they usually have a large indoor arena, and that has a big roof on it and such. But if you get down to the bottom on the arena floor, and then you go back into the locker rooms or whatever restrooms on that lower floor, you're well underground, and you have a roof that's very high, and so that's keeping the fallout away from you. And the best way to protect yourself from radiation is time, distance, and shielding. So the roof provides a little bit of distance. The structure it can provide you with a fair amount of shielding, and then you just need time. I would say, there's enough concern in the world right now. It would be good for a person who is concerned about that to go scout out a few buildings, scout the entrances and such. Most of those big commercial buildings have crash bars on them. you might have to be prepared to take a hammer and a chisel and knock a little hole in the glass in order to put a wire through and pull a crash bar in order to open that door, if it's off hours and there's nobody around. I guess doing a little bit of damage like that it's worth saving your life, I guess, if you're very concerned about that. But maybe you could scout those buildings in advance. A lot of buildings, say on a university campus, that has a central boiler system. You can go to the central boiler house, and there are pipe runs and pipe chases, which usually are big enough for a person to walk through, where all the hot water pipes and that go to all the various buildings are situated. And in order to maintain those pipes, there's a walkway, and if you get into those walkways, you're well underground, you're away from the entrance, and so those are excellent shielding places. You should be prepared to stay there for a few weeks, though, and that's a little bit of an issue. But if you think like a camper and say get a backpack or maybe even just some luggage with the wheels on it, and get yourself a few gallons of water, a sleeping bag, and a sleeping pad, and some food rations. Just think I'm going to have to go camping on my own for a few weeks and carry that stuff along with you. But I think the ideal thing is to scout those buildings in advance, know where you're going to go, and you could even pre-station some supplies there. Those places aren't necessarily frequented all the time, so you could actually stash some material there that you would need to go to, and you'd be prepared to go there right away. Under highways, there are large culverts, where rivers and streams go underneath those. Wouldn't be the best place, but in a pinch, something like that, where you could get as far away as you could from the ends, and you get to where you have some mass on top of you, the road and the dirt that's on top of it, and you could actually survive there for a while.
Just to be clear, Jay, the thing we're trying to protect us from is the fallout, those little round pieces of like
Yeah.
glass. That
Yeah.
that's
You want
gonna
to
be
stay away from the fallout. I would suggest that everyone actually have some means of measuring radiation because you don't really know how bad it is. I believe they're still manufacturing the little keychain size nuclear monitors called Nuke Alert. I don't know if you're
Yep.
familiar with that. I still see those advertised here and there. It's just like a little fob on a keychain, and when it's exposed to radiation, it starts clicking. The number of clicks in a row indicate how high the radiation is. And you learn from Nuclear War Survival Skills book that the radiation actually decays on an exponential basis. After 48 hours, the initial radiation will fall to roughly a tenth of what it was, and then you have to 7 times that, so you go to roughly to 2 weeks. It reduces by a factor of 10 again, and then you have to go 7 times the 2 weeks. So you're looking at 14 weeks or whatever, but and it'll reduce by another factor of 10. So you're down to 1/1000th. In an area of heavy nuclear fallout, you can get as high as maybe 4 to 5,000 Roentgens per hour, and we can only handle roughly 200 Roentgens before we get, or well, you can usually handle 200 Roentgens without getting sick. At 400 Roentgens, you would start to feel the effects of the radiation exposure, and then if you get up to around 600 Roentgens, most people die. We do sell dosimeters on the website as well, and they are $300. There's some that are much less expensive. I just barely got an issue or a catalog from Sportsman's Guide. They're actually selling the radiation survey meters. There is a good test, and the information about how to use those meters is also on our website, and you can test those meters. I actually had access to a facility that could test the meters, and I actually tested hundreds of meters, and all the ones that would pass the initial test to make sure that the meter is working properly, they were actually able to measure radiation. So I think that they were built to be reliable, and but the problem is they were built in the 50s and 60s, and so they're a little bit aged at this point, but a lot of them are still working really well. You can go on Amazon and look for radiation meters, and there's many of them available for something in the $100 to $200 range. I would just have something that would measure something in the, at least the hundreds of Roentgens range, and not just something that like a lot of the medical dosimeters and that, and radiation alarms are measuring in very, very low ranges, and they might just be saturated in a real event. The good thing about radiation is that you can absorb a fair amount of radiation and still do just fine. It's not like the first little bit is going to hurt you.
So if I was hunkering down someplace and I didn't know for certain, or I didn't have a meter, what would you say would be safe to start venturing out a little bit, especially if I'm very hungry and thirsty?
Yeah, I would probably stay at least a few weeks, and I know that sounds like a long time if you're hungry, but you could probably survive, and then you can look around, see if you venture out and see if there's a lot of foreign material, whatever, on horizontal surfaces. Just look for something. If you don't see a lot of that, then you think, okay, maybe I'm safe and I can venture a little bit further. So. It is a hard thing, and a meter would definitely help you out. I remember when they had the problem with the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, Japan, the population didn't know how much radiation they were receiving and when it was bad and that. And not knowing is the worst thing, really is. A lot of people were anxious to help, but they didn't know if it was safe to venture into that zone and how bad it would be. Whereas if you have a meter, then you can kind of make that decision for yourself. A meter, I would say, is very important, and then keeping some supplies and water handy and scouting out a place to go. I would say would be the most important thing.
I think that's a pretty good summary. Probably number one would be to scout things out. Does that sound right?
I would say so, and put together your supplies. We should mention that Nuclear War Survival Skills book actually has a design for a fallout shelter, which consists of digging a trench, maybe 3 feet wide, maybe 3 or 4 feet deep, and then covering that trench with timbers, and then shoveling all the material that you shoveled out of that trench back onto the top of the trench. And you can leave the ends open, but with that trench, that is actually a reasonable fallout shelter. And they did an experiment where they took a couple of college girls and said, okay, there's been a nuclear blast. You guys need to build yourself a trench shelter. And they did. Actually, they were able to do that in roughly 24 hours.
So you'd need some kind of timbers then to create the roof, whatever you could find, tree branches, that are strong enough to hold that, dimensional lumber, whatever you can come up with to cover. But the key is to think about these things now and take some steps. And one of those would probably be to get this book, the Nuclear War Survival Skills book. This is kind of, like I said, the Bible for understanding this topic and being able to take responsible action.
So, Jay, you talked about those girls being able to dig that in 24 hours. Once an event occurs, how long would it take for the fallout to be a problem? Do we have 24 hours?
You have quite a few hours of before the fallout starts coming down. You build a great big thermal column. It gathers all this stuff up. It goes and cools down, and it takes quite a while for the fallout to come down and be deposited. I guess the good thing is it does give you a little bit of time. The bad thing is it can spread that fallout hundreds of miles downrange, and so you don't know whether you've been irradiated or where the fallout is and how bad it is, I guess, until it gets there. But it's manageable, I guess. A lot of people think that the world will just come to an end and the planet will become unlivable, but that's really not the case. And they did a lot of open air testing, and some of the people in southern Utah paid the price for that. There was a lot of fallout distributed downrange, and some people were exposed to that. And there was some relatively high cancer rates in southern Utah in the many years and decades after that. So, but it is survivable, and the world will go on. There will be certainly some areas that are absolutely devastated, but there will be places where you can live a fairly normal life after that. And the problem is, with any crisis, I guess, people will panic. And I would say, you asked about maybe driving home or whatever, and I would recommend against that. I would say at least stay away from the freeways and the highways. When everyone panics, it will be kind of, well, the freeways will probably become impassable. as well as some of the major highways and such. So it's good to go where the crowd is not going, and then you'd be able to function a little bit. It was kind of interesting. I don't know if you remember Bronze Dakotas, but the government did
Yes.
a thought experiment, I guess. What if there was an EMP and the power goes out in a city? Does the government try and make an announcement that we've had an EMP strike and that the power is going to be out indefinitely? In their thought experiment, they said if they made such an announcement, everyone would be leaving the city at the same time. The roads would become jammed and very few people would make it out. On the other hand, if they didn't make the announcement, just let the general population wonder about it and not have any definite information. A few people who were a little bit more aware and got out early could survive. And in fact, more people would survive if they did not make the announcement than if they did. And so I would not depend on the government to give you any indication that there is a has been a problem. They don't want to cause mass panic because nothing would work and more people will die. I would also like to mention right now I'm involved with the county and city CERT groups and such, and they get a lot of their directions from FEMA and such. But basically, they don't have a real good plan for nuclear war. If they had an imminent nuclear conflict, their plan is to have the population evacuate the cities, but they have no place to go and no supplies once you get there. So basically, you're on your own and you should go to a place that is not where the crowd is going. And I think that is probably hunkering down, finding or building a place of shelter and having your supplies ready and staying there for as long as you can survive, I guess, before you have to come out and find food and water.
I think we've kind of focused here on expedient kinds of shelter, but I think it's worth putting a little point in here that those who do have homes, and especially those who have basements and can actually kind of implement some things in advance, and it doesn't have to be, really super expensive, but knowing what to do and how you can quickly finish building, or maybe you have it already in place, having the supplies that you need. I think that that's a good point to make here at the end. We have focused on college students and people who are maybe not aware and not don't have an easy place to go. But let's not forget about all of us who can really take some steps right now that will make a difference.
And I think too, it bodes well for us to make sure that we've got supplies in our car all the time. Because if we're traveling and we can't be home, we need to be able to hunker down someplace. We understand where we can go, but we need to be able to have the food and the water and the resources. And if we just take time and make sure that those are in our vehicle, it can make a big difference.
I'd like to point out, there are lots of things that you can do in your basement. You can use drums full of food storage or even just a little bit of lumber and dirt. It's pretty cheap. You can build a little sheltered area in your basement. You choose the place where the dirt level on your foundation is the highest, and you go to a little corner there and you put as much mass on top of you and to the opposite side of you that you can, and that would protect you. And it doesn't have to be a stand-up place. It can be just a place where you can go in and lay down for an extended period. And you do have to think about things like sanitation and water. So it has to be a little bit bigger, but it can be fairly small and modest. On the TACTA blog, I actually documented the building of a cellar. And most people would find a cellar perhaps useful, but for roughly $5,000, you can buy the lumber, you can build an underground structure made out of lumber, and put a bunch of dirt on top of it, and you could actually have something in your backyard that would function as a cellar that would also function as a fallout shelter. We do have an underground shelter that would function as a good blast shelter and everything in our backyard. But my wife wanted a cellar that she could just use and walk in standing up. And so I took that as kind of a challenge and built one. And the whole structure is made out of wood. It doesn't have a foundation. Building codes wouldn't necessarily apply, but I used a 4 by 12 plank about 20 feet long as the foundation. and I just put some lag screws up and then put 8x8 posts on top of that. And I made sure all the lumber was actually covered with several sheets of 6 mil plastic before I buried it. And then those 8x8 posts support an 8 by 12 inch beam on top, and then there's 4 by 12 inch planks on top of those, and then 2 by 12 planks around the sides. You cover that structure with plastic and then put dirt on it, build yourself a substantial door, and you can have your really good fallout shelter and useful cellar for that cost me roughly $5,000. So it can be done if you have a little bit of property and think about the neighborhood. If $5,000 is a little bit too much, you could approach the neighbors and say, hey, we could build a common cellar, and we can all use that for various things, and we could go in on it. And just think, you're going to have to cooperate with your neighbors sometime soon. So, in the event of a problem, so it'd be good to have a little bit of a community shelter slash cellar.
What other final comments do you have that you'd like to share with our audience?
Say it's worth doing. And a lot of people they think, oh, it's too hard and I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. And so they just don't do anything. There's no action there at all. But if we could just convince you that it is worth trying to protect yourself and especially your children. I've got to admit, before I had children, I was a lot more nonchalant about things like about preparedness. But once I had children, and now I have 14 grandchildren, and I think those innocent souls are depending on me to make the right decisions to protect them, and I feel that responsibility keenly. So I would say it can be done, and I've tried to prove that for my whole life, I guess. And perhaps it's you could just think of it as a useful hobby, and you get prepared, you put some things together, and you even go out and find you a radiation meter that would work, and it can be done with fairly modest resources. And so do something, put something together, and join TACTA. It's free to join, and you get access to all of the publications, the Journal of Civil Defense, going all the way back into the late 60s. And there's a lot of really good information there. And so I would suggest doing something, get informed, buy the Nuclear War Survival Skills book. And it's only the first 30 pages or so that deal with nuclear war. After that, it's all the expedient things that you'd have to do for yourself after that, like an expedient wheat grinder, expedient cold weather clothing, expedient furniture building, and things of that nature. So it actually covers everything that you would need to do on your own if you did not have any outside utilities or support. So it's a very useful book, even if you just put it on the shelf and don't read it until there's a crisis. But you really should read some in advance and get a little bit informed, and then you don't panic like the rest of the population. You actually have an action plan and you get it done.
I think that's great wisdom, and there are good resources out there. And again, TACTA, tacda.org. Go and sign up. It's free, and there's a massive wealth of information out there. I agree. I take your challenge and extend it to all of our audience to just take some action, take some thought, and think about these things and take some steps so that you can take care of this if it ever happens. We hope it never does, but if it does, you will be able to take charge with some confidence.
It's worth preparing for.
Yeah. We want to thank you, Jay, for being with us. This is a maybe an uncomfortable topic, but an important topic, something that everybody really needs to think about and do at least a little bit of advanced planning. And so thank you for being with us today. And now for our audience, the question of the day, what other questions do you have for Jay about expedient sheltering and what you can do to prepare for the unthinkable? Comment below, and thanks for being part of the solution.